Hello, my name is Thomas Borgar, and I'm a nationally registered paramedic here at the Omaha station at Midwest Medical. We're upstairs in the training room, and I'm going to kind of give you a rundown, just a little bit of a kind of, not necessarily a training course, but an introduction to the ventilator that we use here at the Omaha station. Here we use the HTC 70. It's a Newport's brand of ventilator. It's a fantastic ventilator. I've been using it for about almost 3 years now, and I'm just kind of going to go ahead and run down a lot of the aspects of it so that way you know what to do when you're using the ventilator your own. Start up with go ahead and getting the ventilator going. What we'll need to do is make sure we have all the appropriate materials. So first thing we'll need, of course, is our ventilator. Now this is usually going to be in some kind of a carrying case. It'll be like a metal cage that wraps around it. You want to make sure that your ventilator is charged before you take it out on the call. That would be one of the last things you'd want to happen, is to have your ventilator fail on you. And if it were to fail, you'd have to move to something like bagging your patient. So we have our ventilator here. We know that it's nice and charged, good to go. We've already checked it a little bit. So to go ahead and get it started going up, what you're going to do, take your ventilator, you're going to flip it around, and back here, right here, you're going to see this is a switch. You can't really see it very well in the video, but it is. So I'm going to go ahead and push it, and hear it click. There you go. And that beep, and the screen starts to light up to let you know that it's on. I always say that the ventilator is going to talk to you a little bit before it gets going.
Hello? The HT70 is now starting up. Please wait.
Alright, so while that's going, I like to make sure that I have my other materials handy. So I like to take about 2 circuits. This is a circuit. The circuit's just your tubing that connects your ventilator to your patient. It's also a good idea to have a filter with you. These come in separate packages. This is just a standard bacterial viral filter. You're going to use this on most calls. The only time you're not going to use it is when you're using something like a HEPA filter. HEPA filters are for your like COVID-19, your airborne pathogens, things like that could make it through a very small filter like the standard issue bacterial viral filter. So the HEPA filter comes and it's a big yellow box, and you place it in the same position, but you'd want to place it also on the exhalation valve on your circuit. So we're going to go ahead and open up our circuit. And there we go. So you can notice we've got, it looks like a bunch of wires, but it's just 3 tubes. And of course with the tube you got 2 ends. This end is going to go to your patient, and this end is going to connect to our ventilator. So here we're going to go ahead and start up by the patient. This end connects to the patient's ET tube into their trach, or it's going to connect to a BiPAP mask. And to use that, we just go ahead and take the blue cap off. Now you can, if you need to, if it needs to be a straight connection, you can pull the whole elbow off and you'd have just the top there. It gives you a little more flexibility in attaching your circuit to the patient. Down here, this is the exhalation valve. So with this, you just go ahead and you just leave it open, but we want to make sure we have that in mind, that this tube is connected, this little clear tube is connected to the exhalation valve. Now being that this end goes to the patient, we have another blue tube right here. This blue tube is proximal to the patient in comparison to the exhalation valve. So when you go ahead and look at our vent here on the HTC 70, we've got 3 input connections here. We've got our main tube here, which is labeled the gas output. We've got the proximal line, which is this little one up here, and we've got the exhalation valve, which is the little one over here. Now you can see the ventilator is beeping at me, and it's got this. So this is an alarm, and over here is showing that it's got an alarm status. If you go ahead and read that, it says no external power, switching to battery power. So this is just letting us know that it's not plugged in and then it's running on its own battery. So to go ahead and clear an alarm, and this works with any alarms, you press the red button up here. The red button is labeled Alarm Silence Reset. So we're going to go ahead and click it once, and that will silence it. And you see the orange light on top went off, but this error is still there. So we're going to press it one more time, and that's going to clear the whole thing. Alright, I'm going to kind of adjust the camera here so we can see the ventilator a bit better. From here, what I'm going to go ahead and do is start to hook up my circuit. Alright, so here we start with the bacterial viral filter, and we're going to plug, so we've got a big end and we've got this smaller end here. The big end is going to plug onto the big end of the gas output here. Alright, so we got that on there, tight and secure. Then we're going to take the big end of our circuit, plug it into there. Okay, now like I said before, we've got the two other additional tubes. We've got the exhalation valve and the proximal line. Proximal line, we're going to go ahead and hook up to the proximal line outlet here, right? This one. And we got the exhalation valve, which we're going to hook up to the small one. Now you push these in until they're tight. It doesn't have to go all the way down to the plastic. It just got to be on so it's tight and it's not going to come off. It usually does a fairly good job of staying on. Let's see if I can't adjust that so we can see it better. Alright, so we've got that hooked up. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do a circuit check, because we want to make sure that our circuit's good. So I'm going to go ahead and click on circuit check, and then it's going to give us instructions. On the screen here it says two-step check. Step 1, occlude the patient end of circuit and press accept to start, or press cancel to exit. So I'm going to accept to start. Okay. Now it's going to say open the patient circuit, press accept to continue. So I'm going to go ahead with the blue cap, I'm going to take that off. So it's open, accept to start. And it's going to go ahead and do a full circuit check. So this is just kind of ensuring that the circuit and the ventilator is working the way it should be. Alright, so it says circuit check passed. Press accept to continue. So now I'm going to replace my blue cap. And I'm going to press accept to continue. Okay. So from here we can go ahead and start looking at modes and settings and all that wonderful stuff about this ventilator. To begin with here, we'll start with the mode that it's in right now, which is ACMV volume control. Let's see. There we go. I think that lets you see a little better. Okay, so ACMV, it's assist control mechanical ventilation. So the purpose of this mode is to breathe for the patient in a manner that results in rest and recovery of the pulmonary tissues. So as you can see, we have several different settings that we can mess with here. Everything we can mess with is this kind of like a J formation, I guess you could say, on the screen. First thing is VT right here. This is the tidal volume. And our tidal volume here is in liters. So 0.50 would be 500 milliliters. And so tidal volume is the volume of, essentially you could say, gas delivered to the patient for every breath. Respiratory rate, RR, 15. So we're giving 500 milliliters at a rate of 15. I time is the inspiration time. So this is the time that the ventilator gives that breath over. The pressure trigger here is the pressure that's required within the system, so the circuit. So a patient starts to take a breath, and they're going to go ahead and start to get that pressure difference. Well, if you get to the pressure difference of 1, it's going to trigger the vent to deliver another breath. And then down here we have the PEEP, which is the positive and expiratory pressure. This is kind of what everybody has an. So usually within a person's body, they have a natural PEEP somewhere between 2 to 4, even up to 5. So generally, when you intubate somebody, someone's intubated, or if they have like a tracheostomy in or something like that, you can generally have the PEEP at least at 5. Since we've taken away the automatic PEEP within someone's body by placing that tube in. So here, those are the modes that we're going to mess with. You can say, okay, what about this flow up here? So this flow is going to auto-adjust based on our I time and our tidal volume. So if you watch this up here, when I change the I time, it's going to automatically adjust the flow. It's just kind of a nice, easy simplification. So most of all the times that we're going to use the ventilator is going to be hospital transports, or like an emergency room to a hospital. Generally, we're going to need to get these vent settings either from the respiratory therapist or the doctor that is in charge of the patient to begin with. If the patient is not currently on a ventilator, if they're just being bagged, you usually get the ventilator settings from the doctor that's in charge, especially in the state of Nebraska. As a paramedic, it's a lot simpler that way. I will still kind of help you along the way with setting up ventilator settings yourself, so that way you have an idea, but it's advised to get the settings from the doctor. So here, the one thing that I do not have that will be on your ventilator is right here on this right side. Turn around so you can see, is an opening. Usually we're going to have an FiO2 blender over here, and that's going to allow a hookup to oxygen, so that way we can blend in oxygen with our breaths. Generally we're going to start at 100%, and then it just weans it back down until you have the patient at the lowest level of oxygen that you can give them while they're still oxygenating. But yeah, so to begin with, we can look at tidal volume. So tidal volume is generally about 6 to 8 milliliters per kilogram. And that's not kilogram of body weight that the person is. This is ideal body weight. Ideal body weight is, we can calculate that using a formula. I have a ventilator cheat sheet, and down here I have the ideal body weight formula. So for men, it's defined as 50 plus, and then we got in parentheses 0.91 times it by the height in centimeters minus by 152.4. So this is obviously, it's something that's much easier, much easier to have on you and to calculate than it is to try to remember the whole formula. If you do want to remember the whole formula, by all means go for it, but it's just the way that I like to work. Is that use as many sheets as you can. Women is just a little different. In women it's 45.5 plus 0.91 times by the height in centimeters minus by 152.4. Yeah, so you go ahead when you get your patient, you kind of determine what their height in centimeters would be. Minus that by 152.4. Multiply that by 0.91 and then add that to 50 or 45.5, and that'll give you your ideal body weight. So from there, once you have your ideal body weight, then you'd multiply it by 6, and I like to multiply it by 6, and then that would give me my low number, and I'd like to multiply it by 8, and that gives me my high number. So then I have kind of this range that I know I need to be within. Generally, the hospital's already done this. RT's already has their values in their mind. It might be done on the computer. All these things, and that's fantastic. It's also good just to know your range in case you do end up needing to change a setting in transport, so that way you know how far you can go. However, if you do go to start changing the tidal volume, you may also want to make sure that you appropriately change your respiratory rate to maintain an adequate minute ventilation. Your minute ventilation is going to be your tidal volume multiplied by your respiratory rate, because that's the amount of gas that the patient is going to be getting over a minute. The I time, the inspiration time, generally it's going to be about anywhere from 0.7 to 1. That's usually what it is. The thing with all ventilators is that it's going to vary greatly from patient to patient. So I can give you pointers and I can kind of help you along with setting things up, but I can't fully give you every situation and vent setting that you might encounter. These are pretty general vent settings that you might see. Usually I like to have the pressure trigger up a little more. I like to keep mine about 3. You can kind of gauge your pressure trigger, because if you get the circuit and if you have your pressure trigger set and it's ventilating, like you started the ventilation, you start shaking the circuit, if that starts to initiate breath, your pressure trigger is too low. Because in the back of the ambulance, ventilator's probably the circuit's going to be shaking up and down. And if the ventilator thinks that the patient's taking a breath every time that the circuit's going up and down, you have a greater risk of causing barotrauma to your patient. And that's one of the last things we want to do. So I like to keep the pressure trigger about 3. Yeah, sometimes we'll run into a case where we have someone who has ARDS, so acute respiratory distress syndrome. These patients are going to have much different vent settings than what we normally would see. So in an ARDS patient, there's a lot of different controversial tactics such as prone positioning, reverse Trendelenburg, all these things. So with a ARDS patient, you might see a very low tidal volume, something like 360 milliliters. And you'd be like, okay, well that's much less than 6 to 8, but how are you going to maintain a minute volume with ventilation? Well, they increase the respiratory rate all the way up to like 34, 35. The I time will be much lower. It might be like 0.7. And the PEEP, sometimes people will increase the PEEP all the way up to 20. I've seen it at 24 before. So, just keep an open mind when you go to the hospitals. If, there's a vent setting or something like that that you don't understand, be sure to ask questions. Everybody around here is usually very open to, explaining why it's done this way and why their vent settings are the way they are, as it's, pertinent to that patient. Next thing we'll go into is we also have pressure control. So what pressure control does is pressure control allows it to, instead of being measured by the amount of gas that's being delivered to the patient, it delivers gas until it reaches a certain pressure. So the pressure control is, it's going to go ahead and push gas through the circuit to the patient to get to a peak inspiratory pressure of 20. Not 20 over the PEEP, just 20 total. Okay. You're not going to see a whole lot of pressure control. Pressure control is ideal for pediatric patients because with pediatric patients having different anatomies, you'd be at an increased risk of barotrauma. So what pressure control does is it prevents that barotrauma, but it's not the greatest in making sure that you achieve the minute ventilation that you're looking for, as you're not having a consistent tidal volume every single breath. Okay, so we can go back to volume control. Once again, this ACMV volume control. From here, we can also look down here, this little bar down here. This tells us these are kind of our monitoring. So this is things that you can click on. If we click on one, it brings up this, and this is everything that I'd be monitoring in real time. So right now we have VT, so we've got the tidal volume, we've got the minute ventilation, we have a cylinder time, and we've got the battery time. I like to also kind of keep the respiratory total down here, and as long as it's a shorter transport, other good ones would be the mean PAW, and that stands for the mean peak airway pressure, and then the peak airway pressure. We've also got the IE ratio, and that's just kind of letting us know our inspiratory to expiratory ratio. So we can go ahead and set these to everything that we want to look for. Something like ACMV volume control, having tidal volume down here is not going to help us a whole lot because we know we're going for this. It's going to go to a tidal volume of 500. So having 500 down here is kind of wasting our spaces. So we can change this to mean airway pressure. So now we've got all values that could possibly change. Your respiratory total will be 15 unless the patient is breathing over the vent. Usually with the ACMV, you don't want the patient to breathe over the vent, just because when a patient does initiate a breath, they're going to get the whole set breath here. So patient goes to initiate a breath, even if they just wanted a short breath, they're going to get hit with this whole breath that we're giving. So it increases the risk of barotrauma that they could have to their airways if they are to be initiating a lot of breaths. So most of the time that a patient's on ACMV, this is like the first vent setting that somebody gets. They're been sedated, they've been intubated. At this point they're looking for lungs to rest and recover. So you'd put them in ACMV, usually volume control. Now, if you want the patient to be able to breathe on their own, we can change the mode to SIMV. So what SIMV is going to do, it's going to allow the patient to take breaths in between the set ventilation. So right now we have 15 breaths set on the ventilator. So the patient's going to get 15 breaths no matter what. Now if the patient wants to breathe another 5 times on top of that, they can have those 5 breaths, and they can breathe those as much or as little as they'd like to. With that being said, we also have a new setting up here. it's PS, and then in parentheses it has a greater than sign and PEEP. So this is the pressure support over PEEP. And what this does is it's going to go ahead and allow the patient to receive almost like a BiPAP in between their breaths. So the PEEP's going to be 5. So you know you have a pressure of 5 in the system. But when they when they inspire on their own, it's going to increase the pressure 10 more than the PEEP of 5. So they'll get 15 as a positive pressure ventilation whenever they breathe in on their own. And then the rest of the time, the other 15 breaths are going to be what we set, just like the last one. So we'll still have the same tidal volume, respiratory rate, I time, pressure trigger, PEEP, and our FiO2 over on the side, since that's what we would have. And SIMV also has a pressure control mode as well. Anytime that you make a change on this ventilator, it's a touch screen, so you touch it, and it will change to what it wants to what you need it to be, and then you accept to keep the change. If I change something and don't press accept, eventually it will refer back to what it was. So we need to make sure every time we make a change that we hit accept. Okay. Last mode we have on here is spontaneous. So spontaneous is the HTC 70's version of BiPAP or bi-level. And what this does is it gives you a higher inspiratory pressure and a lower expiratory pressure, but it keeps positive pressure in both cases. So right now we have a pretty basic one set up. We have a PEEP of 5, that's your expiratory pressure, and you've got a pressure support of 7. So this would give us an IPAP or an inspiratory pressure of 12. To determine the inspiratory pressure, since this is the pressure support over PEEP, you add your pressure support to your PEEP. With spontaneous, it doesn't matter if you have it in pressure control or volume control, because we're not delivering a set volume or set pressure. The patient's in control of this. With spontaneous, it's going to be usually limited to using a mask similar to CPAP. That mask will be on the patient, and then the patient needs to be able to have a patent airway, all those same contraindications of putting on CPAP or BiPAP on. The patient needs to have a patent airway. They usually need to be alert and oriented. There are very few cases where the patient may not be fully alert, that a hospital might have them and need them to be sent out. In that case, use your judgment, and if you have questions, be sure to ask the referring doctor or contact medical control for further instructions. Yeah, so these are just kind of the basic rundown of the settings. So if we go back to ACMV, and let's say we're here. So we've gotten to this point. We've gotten our settings are in. We know our bounds. We know what we're going for. And then we're about ready we could start ventilation, right? So if we're going to start ventilation, what we do is we go ahead and we'd make sure the RT's ready with their ventilator. We're ready with ours. We take the cap off. Oop. There we go. Cap's off. Start ventilation. So you see here it's going to say check circuit or proximal line. And the reason it's coming up with that is because there's nothing on the end of it. You can see here if I'm giving it a little pressure against it, it's going to go ahead. But every time it tries to breathe, you see this green bar on the side. And this green bar is letting us know the pressure that it's getting to. It doesn't have numbers associated with it, but we can change our alarm setting to match this. So if we click alarms, we can change our pressure alarm to try to get it to a lower bounds. Oh. So ideally, we want to make sure that we're getting consistent pressures. A little hard with my finger here. But this is what we want. And then, if something were to go wrong, just as you saw there, it's going to throw an alarm. So there's multiple alarms that we could have in route. We have high pressure, low pressure. and it's going to give us that red flashing light, and we'll get the alarm up here. So when we get that alarm, it's going to tell us what's going on. Low pressure. So it's not saying it's not breathing against anything. There we go. To clear these alarms off the ventilator, like this, it goes black once the alarm is no longer needed. So, to clear it off, we go ahead and press the red button again. And it's going to start clearing our log. There we go. So this is closer to what we'd want to see with a patient. We've got, we can bring down our pressure, so we've got a nice tight side here, so that way we're getting consistent breaths. If we start to get alarms saying, that it keeps going up, and we're looking at our mean airway pressure and our peak airway pressure, and if our peak airway pressure keeps going up and our mean airway pressure is going up, we're going to want to think that, something might be causing this. In that case, you have to look at what might be causing an increased airway pressure. It could have mucus, and you need to suction your patient. It could be that the airways are constricting, and you need to try to dilate those airways. There's a whole number. Maybe the patient's waking up and they're starting to bite on the tube, and that's causing increased resistance. If you start having low pressure, you might want to check your circuit. That'd be one of the first things I'd want to check to do, is make sure that all my circuit connections are hooked up. It didn't fall off the patient, anything like that. Sometimes with bumps in the road, things can get a little dislodged, and a little bit of pressure like that from the breath might be enough to pop the circuit off. Other things that might cause low pressure is, in a rare instance, maybe the balloon on the ET tube could have ruptured, in which case you wouldn't have adequate pressure building up, because it'd just be flowing around the ET tube as well. So you always want to keep in the back of your mind, what could be going on with this patient that would cause these alarms to happen. Alright, so now real quick, to make sure, once we get our patient off the vent, what we would do is we go back to the back again, hit the switch, and you hold the switch until the screen changes to this. It says press accept to shut down, or press cancel to ignore. So we'd press accept to shut down. It says please wait, shut down in process, and then we'd go ahead and click the red button to silence the alarm. And that is the simple running of the ventilator. A couple extra things about the ventilator. You want to make sure that it's always plugged in when it's not in use. To plug it in the back here, right over here. Right, this is our connection, and so it should be real easy. Click right in, pops right out. You shouldn't need to pull or wiggle on it too hard. It should just be nice, easy. It's a pinch and pull, or pinch and push in. Additionally, underneath this is the FiO2 where a blender would hook up to. What we do is you can unscrew these two screws right here, and there's actually a filter right here. We want to make sure we change that filter, usually about at least once a month. And that, ensures that you have a clean running system. You don't want to have dirt and dust and that just collecting in that filter and just kind of bogging it down. Okay, a few more notes that I didn't get touch on too much with that. So once I turned it on, it kind of led to some more pressures and stuff like that. What you can look at here is alarms. So if we press the alarms button, it's going to come to this red alarms screen. Here we got alarm loudness, so you can turn even down at 1. It's a fairly loud alarm, and we can keep it at 1, and you're going to know when it goes off it's still very, very loud. If you want to keep it at 6, by all means go ahead. And we can go ahead and clear our external power one again. We've got our pressure alarms here, and that's always seen here on this right side of the screen. We've got 2 red bars, the top and the bottom, and then the green bar will go up based on the patient's breath. So we want to make sure we get our pressures, in kind of tight, so that way you can tell if something goes off without it being too long. So that way when the patient, if they start to cough, wake up, bite the tube, that sort of thing, we'll know about it. If you have the pressure set all the way up, you might not know right away if you're not paying direct attention to the patient and staring at them. You might be adjusting a titration drip or something like that, and the patient starts to bite on the tube. You'd know right away when the ventilator starts going off. Other things would be the minute volume over here. So we've got 50 and 1. This is something you could change based on your patient. This is one alarm that will probably go off quite a bit with some of your BiPAP patients. If the patient has a high minute ventilation or high minute volume, it's going to say that for some of the BiPAP patients, just because it's not getting a good enough seal on the patient's face, so you're having a lot of leakage. And so the leaking air, it's still trying to push enough air to achieve that inspiratory pressure and the expiratory pressure, but since it's leaking, it has to use a whole lot more of the gas, and it's going to use a lot more of your FiO2, and it's going to burn through your oxygen bottles faster as well. So having a good face seal for a BiPAP with that mask on is going to be key. But that's one thing that could be going off with your high minute volume. Another thing is sometimes, if the patient's fairly anxious, they could also be breathing pretty quickly and taking really big breaths with that BiPAP, and that might increase your minute volume as well. With that, you might just need to try to coach your patient down a little bit. Hey, just, nice, slow, deep breaths, and that help them work with the ventilator more and keep their minute volume down more. That also helps prevent them from blowing off too much of their carbon dioxide. We also have our respiratory rate over here. So you can have our apnea alarm. So if a patient's on BiPAP and they're not breathing, you could set it 12 times, and if they don't breathe that 12 times, it's going to throw up an apnea alarm. Or if they're not breathing enough for it to be adding up to 12 times a minute, then it's going to throw the apnea alarm. And then you have the high respiratory rate, so you could turn that all the way down, 34 or wherever you need it to be based on your patient. It's not going to be a big deal with some of your intubated and sedated like ventilator patients, because most of the time their breaths are going to be whatever you set it to be on the ventilator. But with some of your BiPAP patients, these are going to become more into effect. To come from the alarm screen back to the screen where we were changing our settings, you're just going to click on main, and I'll bring you right back here. We also have more here. There's more options. You got your SOAP rise, you've got your pressure support, max eye time, flow, and it's just a couple more settings that you can dive into. We could go into this on another video. I want to make sure that I just kind of get through at least the basic settings, so that way you can feel a little more comfortable operating the machine on your own or with your partner. You can go back to main and activate preset. Some people like to go ahead and preset some settings, and so that way if you were to activate the preset up here, you've got your adult, pediatrics, infants, and for this, some people will go ahead and put in very basic vent settings, something average for an adult, and you can roll with that sometimes. But you're gonna most of the time for us, we're going to not be initiating people on the vent, so copying vent settings from a hospital would be ideal. Other thing you want to keep in mind is when you do take a ventilated patient, you want to take in mind the end tidal. They don't always have end tidal on at the hospital, but we have the capability with the Zoll X series to run end tidal monitoring. So it's a very useful key, and it's something we can use to try to maintain patient stability a little better. Based on someone's the ABGs, the arterial blood gases, you can use a Winter's formula to come up with, how low their end tidal CO2 can be, acceptably for some patients, in kind of combating something like DKA. But that, like I said, that could be something else on another video as well, going into more of the blood gases. But in terms of setting up the ventilator, running the ventilator, I think this is it pretty much covers how to use it. Yeah, thanks for watching.